part I cut out of the video. Good afternoon and welcome to Good Journeys Tarot. Today I'm with author and artist Laura Perry. Welcome to Good Journeys Tarot.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Sure. Today we're going to be talking about her deck, the Minoan Tarot. But before we get into that, I want to just talk a little bit about how she became interested in the Minoans and has become such a amateur expert on the Minoans. So what first drew you to the Minoans?
I can actually blame my 9th grade art history teacher. We had this enormous book. It was like the size of an unabridged dictionary. And we were flipping through it on the first day, and there were these beautiful color plates. And we came to one of the Bull Leaper fresco. And something just clicked in the back of my head, and I got goosebumps all over, and it became kind of an obsession at that point, and I'm old enough that was before the days of the internet.
Okay.
And so for years I lived off of little snippets from encyclopedias until more stuff finally became available. Great.
And now she actually offers 2 online courses on her website, lauraperryauthor.com.
Yeah, that's it's Minoan spirituality, so it's like Ariadne and the Minotaur and Dionysus and that pantheon, the way we experience them in the modern world, because we can't be ancient Minoans, right? But we can connect with the parts of that culture and spirituality that have meaning for us now.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you've also written some books related to the Minoans?
I have.
So tell us about your books.
The first one is called Ariadne's Thread. Very imaginative title there.
That's also the name of your Facebook group.
The Facebook group is Ariadne's Tribe.
Oh, right.
I tried calling it Ariadne's Thread, and for some reason the system wouldn't take it, so there must be one out there already. But anyway, the 2 books are Ariadne's Thread and Labyrinths and Horns, and they're both about Minoan spirituality. So,
hey, wonderful. And I believe they're both on Amazon along with your deck. Am I not right?
Yeah.
Yes.
All Amazon platforms worldwide.
All right, wonderful. Well, let's talk a little bit about your deck. What made you decide to create a tarot deck based on Minoan spirituality?
A sudden bout of insanity, I guess. I'll find you the picture in here. I've been doing tarot for years and years. And so I was doing tarot. I had a layout on my desk one day, and I had a book about the Minoans lying open on my desk, and it had a picture. This is not the fresco. This is the artwork that I did for the tarot card, but this is based on the Prince of the Lilies. There we go. It's based on the Prince of the Lilies fresco from Minoan Crete. And so I was looking at the tarot cards on my desk, and I looked over at that book, and I thought, man, that fresco, that looks like a tarot card. And so I thought, surely there is a Minoan tarot deck out there. So I got online, and I started searching, and there wasn't one. It was crushing to discover that I couldn't just click and order one, right? And so, as so often happens with people in the tarot community and the pagan community, if we can't find a resource that we want, we make it. And I didn't realize how much was involved in creating a whole tarot deck, or I probably wouldn't have done it. But I had no idea, so naivete was my friend in that case, and I plunged ahead, and I ended up making a whole tarot deck. It took 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'd love to see some of your artwork that you did for the deck.
Okay.
What was the first one that you did?
This is not actually the first card that I did, even though it is the artwork that inspired the deck. The first card that I did, and these are all at 200% of the final artwork. The first one I did is the Snake Goddess, because she is just totally iconic of Minoan civilization. People see the figurine, and they think Minoan. And she is the Adept, is what I called the card in my deck. It's the Hierophant in the Waite-Smith deck. So yeah. And I researched the original Minoan art and like the pigments they used, to do the frescoes, and so all the colors in the deck are actually the colors that the Minoan artists used.
Very good.
So this is a real live Minoan, or dead, or whatever, Minoan color scheme.
So earlier you were showing me your favorite piece that you did.
Yeah, my favorite card, which is probably not the flashiest. See if I can find it. But it has a lot of meaning. This is the card that I used for Fate. And this is from a fresco from Akrotiri that has a goddess in this position. She's not holding a drop spindle the way mine is. But it's very evocative to me because she looks so human, but it's an image of a goddess, right? And she's actually interacting with human beings and animals in the frescoes. And to me, that's like kind of what Fate is. It's these interactions between all the different beings and people in our lives.
Wonderful. So I do have some of your cards out here so we could look at the deck and talk about what you did with it a little bit. First of all, let's talk about your suits. So this is the Ace of Horns, and the horns is your Earth suit?
That's the Earth suit. They're color-coded, standard colors that most people should be able to recognize.
So this was an interesting one. When I first saw it, I wasn't sure how this was a horn. And then today on your Facebook group, you posted a photograph of a horn in a doorway at an archaeological site, I believe.
Yeah, that's Akrotiri.
And so I now can actually picture this.
It's a pair of horns.
Yes. Yes. But this actually looks very similar to the picture that you showed today.
Yes.
So that's wonderful. And this is the one that will probably throw most people initially.
Sorry.
This is the fire suit.
And it has a blade on it, a pointed
daggers.
blade. I'm sorry.
Now, explain to us your reasoning for the dagger.
Okay, I actually struggled for several months deciding what the symbols for the suits were going to be. I wanted to use the 4 elements, and the earth and water came very quickly to me, and then I struggled with the air and fire because the point of this deck was to make a tarot deck that had only Minoan symbolism in it, right? Only things that the Minoans would have known. And in their artwork, we don't find anything that looks like wands or rods or anything like that. So I was looking at Minoan art and Minoan civilization and thinking, what in their world would have represented fire to them? And the big thing that was so important to them as traders and merchants and artisans was bronze. Okay, and bronze smithing. That's how they became so wealthy. And that's fire. Metalsmithing is fire. I don't know if you can really tell, the blades on these came out looking kind of silvery. This is not meant to be a steel blade. This is meant to be a bronze blade. These were Bronze Age people. And to them, pouring molten metal into a mold and getting a figurine or a blade out of it, that's fire magic. And so that's how I ended up, even though it's totally backwards from your standard Waite-Smith symbolism. To them, I think the blades that they sold all over the place and that they were so famous for would have felt like fire rather than air.
I've also heard you just say on another interview that a dagger being a much shorter weapon is more up close and personal. So
yes, yeah. For long range fighting in the Bronze Age, they used spears, which is essentially a tiny little dagger on a giant stick, right? So they didn't have these great big long swords that we think of like from medieval fighting. I expect Bronze Age warfare was really even more uncomfortable than medieval warfare because you had to be right up against the person, right, to get them with these. The daggers are like this long and the short swords are like this long. So this is up close fighting, which is pretty nasty. So
a lot of passion involved when you get that close. Yes. All right. Our Ace of Labrises.
Yes.
This is an axe of sorts.
It is. It's a ceremonial or symbolic axe. The ones that they had that were real axes didn't look this butterfly-like. They did have double-bladed axes that look just like a modern double-blade axe. They're very chunky, not very aesthetic. This is a ritual labrys, and the ones that we found in Minoan sites are made out of metal foil that's almost as thin as like heavy-duty aluminum foil. Many of them, you could literally just crush them in your hands. So they're not weapons, they're symbols. And one of the things we think they were symbols of is wings, like a butterfly. And that's very much an air symbol. It's also one of the most ancient symbols for the human soul.
Awesome.
So,
well, I like the labrys. That's my birth suit, so to speak, air.
Yeah, okay.
So, and I love butterflies, so that
right.
explanation works for me great. And finally, for our water suit, we have the raycons.
Yeah, that one was easy.
All right. Definitely pictures would be appropriate for water. Now, some of the cards in your deck obviously did draw on the RWS imagery and ideas,
Right.
while others are very different. This is a card, the Five of Daggers, which would correspond roughly to the Five of Wands. To me, it is very reminiscent and has that same feeling and look to it of many RWS images that I've seen other artists do. However, you also have cards that are very different, such as the Three of Daggers. Usually you would see a man holding three wands looking out over, an expanse. Tell us about your card.
Well, I was looking for something that could symbolize the concept of first fruits, the beginnings of your creativity, that kind of thing. And it struck me that one of the big things that the Minoans did was they grew grapes, they grew grain, they grew olives. This was a massive part of their culture. So harvest, right? First fruits was a big thing for them, and that's what this is. That's what it's a picture of. It's the grain and the grapes and the olives that are there, the first pickings, the very beginnings of the payment back for all of the passion and creativity that you've put out there.
All right.
So,
very good. Now, and these are some of the major arcana cards. Some of them people will recognize, and so the Labyrinth, that corresponds to the Hermit,
right,
which basically is our search.
It's going inward.
Going inward.
Right, turning inward, your inner world, that kind of thing.
Wonderful. Now, your Strength and Balance cards are the imagery that you mentioned earlier.
So this is, they look kind of, separate them a little bit because there is a bit missing from the original. These two were both inspired by the Bull Leaper fresco. And one of the things that I like about the tarot is that there are patterns. There are connections, not just, down each suit, but across the majors and across the suits. They're sort of horizontal patterns. And to me, strength and balance, the balance would be the Temperance card in the Waite-Smith deck. Mm-hmm. To me, they're related, right? So in the strength card here, you can see, and this is actually, because this figure has white skin, that denotes a woman in Minoan art. So that's actually a woman athlete vaulting up the horns of a bull, right? So it doesn't require just physical strength, right? It requires a kind of inner strength, a kind of focus and control beyond just having enough muscle to do it. And then the Balance card, that's this is a male athlete somersaulting across the back of the same bull in the same fresco. And so it's balance. It's not just physical balance, right? It's balance between your inner and outer strength to be able to do this. And it's also, to me, because it's this highly trained athlete and this enormous bull, it's also like the balance between your civilized and wild sides. And so to me, those cards are very closely related. And so they're like two ends of the same fresco.
Beautiful. Here's another card which is quite different. This is the sacrifice card, which we would normally call the Hanged Man,
right.
which exudes that idea of sacrifice, but this is definitely more representative of the kind of sacrifice that the Minoans would be more familiar with.
Right. And this is actually a portion of the image from the Hagia Triada sarcophagus, which shows a person's funeral. And so this is the sacrifice. We often like to picture the Minoans as this sort of beautiful, shiny, peaceful society, but just like all the other Bronze Age societies, they actually did animal sacrifices. And so this is a bull that would have been sacrificed at this person's funeral to help them descend to the underworld, to help their spirit get going where it needs to be going. And to me, that's related to the Hanged Man figure, in the Hermes position. That's underworld travel. So it's a very similar kind of concept.
And speaking of funerals,
okay,
here is our death card. So tell us a little bit about this card.
That is one of the tombs from around Knossos, and that's actually this portion right here that looks like a coffin. It's actually what's called a kist. It's spelled C-I-S-T, which is it's like a built-in carved stone coffin, and it's in the shape of a labrys in the actual tomb. And then the shrine shelf up here, the stuff was all fallen down off it when the archaeologists found it, but it would have had labryses up on the shelf as well. And so that's kind of a symbol of, it's a symbol of rebirth, but it's a symbol of moving through some kind of change, some kind of shift into something new and different. And so to me, that kind of captures the idea of the doorway that the death card represents.
So everyone will recognize the Minotaur, and of course it's number 15, which is the devil card. Right? Which I guess a lot of people would not have any trouble relating this to the devil, but tell us briefly how you feel it relates.
Okay, well, the Greeks were not exactly the Minoans' best friends, and so they painted the Minotaur, who was a god to the Minoans, as this horrible monster. I think, personally, he represented more like your inner darkness, your shadow, like Jung talked about. You know how we joke about, sometimes I wrestle with my demons and sometimes we just snuggle. So it's like that. So the Minotaur is at the center of the labyrinth, so that when you make that inner journey of the Hermit card, of the Labyrinth card, this is who you meet at the center. And this is your shadow self that you have to face and integrate and become one with.
Wonderful. Okay, so some of your cards are very familiar, of course, like the moon actually has a moon. The sun card here, which has, I forget, are these bees?
They're bees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then we have our star card, which is a little different. We don't see the star. There is, of course, a lady with a Rhyton or pitcher.
She has a giant vase. And then because of the format of the cards, getting her to pour from the giant vase was something I just couldn't hack artistically. So instead I have the waves in her hair, and that's the way the Minoans depicted women's long hair a lot. It looks exactly like waves of water coming down their backs. So I've got that. But yeah, there is no actual star in the picture of the star.
So I will say that when I initially looked at your deck, I was struggling with the horns because initially they appeared to me to be pips, just a number of horns. Once I read your book and heard you explain your cards, I realized that I was mistaken, that there are actually specific images in every card. So one of the examples of that was the Nine of Horns, which it does look a little bit like a pip card because there's 9 horns arranged, but this is actually a rug or an elegant tapestry.
Right. It could be a tapestry or a fresco, either one. It would be something that a wealthy, successful person would be able to display in their home as a sign that they have achieved a certain level of both mastery and skill and material success.
Okay. Which is the meaning I've always gotten from that card. I do kind of miss my pretty woman with the bird, but this is one of the cards that I relate to, so I always look at it to see what it looks like. And when I initially saw it, I thought, oh, it's 9 horns, but it's actually a beautiful tapestry. Thank you for that.
One of the things I decided when I was designing the deck was that I wasn't going to have any whole people or faces in any of the suit cards, the numbered suit cards. You can see hands sometimes, and you can see the backs of people sometimes, but you don't ever see a whole person or a face. I saved that for the court cards and the majors.
Okay.
So,
speaking of the court cards, so many tarot deck creators attempt nowadays in modern times to balance the masculine and female energy in cards, and different artists have done it in different ways. Some have depicted cards as gender neutral, some have left people out of them altogether, and we've had some who have done 2 female pages and 2 male pages, 2 female knights, 2 male knights, in attempts to balance them. So tell us about what you did to balance your deck and how you came to that decision.
Well, it has always kind of driven me nuts that the court cards aren't gender balanced, because even if you make the page female, you've still got page, knight, queen, king, so you have the male cards kind of ranking above the female ones, which just kind of bothers me. And I thought it was especially important for a Minoan tarot deck because we think the Minoans had a gender egalitarian society. And so I went poking around in all the historical tarot decks, and I discovered one. The Visconti Tarocchi deck there are several different varieties of it, several different copies, and there's one that Yale University has. It's called the Carey Yale Visconti Tarocchi, and there are 6 court cards in every suit. So there's a king and queen that are considered equal, and then there's a male and female knight and a male and female page. And I said, yes, I have found my paradigm.
And so we have here the Maid and Youth of Raitan. Maid and Youth. This is a Raitan, this is a horn. But...
Yeah, so the names on the court cards come from the medieval European feudal system, and that didn't apply to ancient Crete. I couldn't kind of make those fit. And so I came up with names for them that fit the different structure of Minoan society. So youth and maid is like the page. So that's like a male and female page. That's the young person just starting out, just finding themselves and just discovering.
And then we have a lord and lady.
Right, so that would roughly be like the knights. So these are adults, right? So they have achieved a certain level of maturity, but they're not sort of wise and they're not to the sort of crone and sage stage yet. And so they can still be impetuous sometimes and not entirely mature.
And then finally, we have our priestess and priest.
Right, so we think Minoan society was actually governed by councils or groups of clergy at the temples. And so this would be, it's not the equivalent of monarchy, but these would be the people who were governing and administering Minoan society. And so that's the equivalent of the king and queen in most court cards. And we would like to think that they were wise and mature and patient and all those kinds of things.
Okay. And of course, then that would make this my significator card in most decks, the air sign, and the priestess, which is roughly equivalent to the queen. So, beautiful card. Was why I had drawn that one up. So, one of the things that Laura did in her book was she discussed the Fool's Journey. And then she created an elemental journey for each of the suits. She has provided an I statement to go as you go through. Let's pause and I will say, I'm going to have Laura read the paragraph that describes my significator.
Okay. The air journey. I embody. You have reached the point in your spiritual journey that you no longer need to act out on the qualities of air. You have brought this primal force into your worldview and into your very being. In your everyday life, you embody the clear thinking, honesty, principles, and ideals of air in a balanced, nuanced way that adds value not only to your own life, but to the lives of those around you as well. You will feel fulfilled and gratified for quite some time, but eventually you will begin to wonder if there is a path that can take you beyond this one to even greater vistas. Of course there is. It begins with the Ace of Horns.
Thank you, Laura. I once heard you say on another interview, there will never be enough tarot decks to express all the different ways of thinking about tarot. So I want to encourage everyone to go to Amazon and check out Laura's deck, the Minoan Tarot, as well as to look for other decks that you may find of interest and learn something new about. Until we meet again, good journeys.